We have Dr. C.L. Gray, founder and president of Physicians for Reform. K. Carl Smith is with us. He's the founder and president of the Frederick Douglass Liberty Messenger. Also with us is Bishop E.W. Jackson, founder and president of STAND, Staying True to America's National Destiny. Terry Beatley is with us, president of No Excuses Ministry Political Action Committee. Hello, and welcome to Vote Your Values Coalition discussion on postmodern worldviews. With us today also we have Dr. C.L. Gray, who is the president and founder of Physicians for Reform. Doctor, when we look at the postmodern worldview, can you define that for us and let us know how that is affecting the American fabric of society today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Teji. In a lot of ways, the postmodern worldview is really contrasted to the Judeo-Christian worldview. And the key difference between the two, at the heart of the Judeo-Christian worldview, is the concept of a fixed truth. There is a truth, a higher moral code that humans are subject to. The base of the postmodern worldview is that truth is what's true for you. Truth is what's true for me. Really, then truth becomes an opinion. So you can't tell me what's right or wrong, and I can't tell you what's right or wrong. So it sounds really great because it gives us autonomous freedom. The problem is when we gain autonomous freedom, things start to break down. In terms of the Constitution, the fixed rule of law, then 5 Supreme Court justices, if they hold a postmodern worldview, as in the case of Keller v. New London, they can actually start to change the wording of the Constitution. And behind the postmodern worldview is another concept that's very important. I think we'll talk about that in a bit, is the meaning of human life. Because essentially, behind the Judeo-Christian worldview is the concept of a God. And with that comes the concept that human life is special, the Imago Dei. We're created in the image of God, so each individual is human. And each human, then, is special. Whereas the postmodern worldview is sort of built, and I won't spend time on it here, but on the concept that we don't need a God, or there isn't a God. So we create truth and meaning for ourselves. The problem is then there's no intrinsic meaning for human life. All human life, doesn't matter if it's left or right, Democrat, Republican, white or black, or the human life is devalued under the postmodern system. So that's really, as we go through the discussion, what you'll see is this recurring pattern, whether we're talking about the fixed meaning of the Constitution or the intrinsic dignity and value of human life, that's going to come through as we compare and contrast these two worldviews.
K. Carl Smith is with us also, and he is the founder and president of the Frederick Douglass Liberty Messenger. K. Carl, what is who are the Frederick Douglass Liberty Messengers?
Frederick Douglass Liberty Messengers are those who believe in the 4 life-empowering values of Frederick Douglass. Number 1, respect for the Constitution. Number 2, respect for life. Number 3, the belief in limited government. And number 4, the belief in personal responsibility. So to become a Frederick Douglass Liberty Messenger, it's not based on your party, it's based on values. It's not based on color, it's based on values. So as a Frederick Douglass Liberty Messenger, we stand between both political parties and encouraging them to embrace the philosophy of Frederick Douglass that I just laid out.
Well, how is that affected by the postmodern worldview?
Well, we got to get to the Constitution and address that question. One of the concerns that in the Black American community that the Founding Fathers gave us slavery, the Constitution. Many blacks feel that way, that blacks were excluded from the Constitution. But Frederick Douglass is key because Frederick Douglass had problems with the Constitution himself at one time. But he did something very interesting. He went back and read the Constitution, then he went back and read the Founding Fathers' Federalist Papers. And he had this great awareness where he said, wait a minute, the Constitution is not a pro-slavery document. The Constitution reads, we the people. It doesn't say we the white people. So if black folks are people, then they ought to be included to be what's in benefits of the benefactors of the Constitution. So the problem is not with the Constitution. The problem is with how the Constitution is applied. And Frederick Douglass is key to that because in his own writings, he takes us through his transformation of believing that the Founding Fathers gave us slavery in the Constitution into where he said, wait a minute, this is an anti-slavery document. The 3/5 clause, which a lot of people say that, and I went to Historical Black College. I was taught that the Founding Fathers gave us slavery in the Constitution because of the 3/5 clause. Then let's bring Douglass on the witness stand again. Douglass, in a speech he gave in 1861, he's the one that gives clarity to the 3/5 clause. Say, wait a minute, the 3/5 clause doesn't talk about blacks being inhuman or less than human, but it was a compromise by the northern states upon the southern slave states to limit their congressional representation in Congress. So that's why Douglass is so key and so powerful. And that's why we align ourselves with the values of Frederick Douglass.
Well, how do you inspire, especially black people today, to at least hear the message and then be able to really question their values of how they believe today?
I think it starts with Scripture. And I know in my particular case, it was 2 Corinthians 13:5 that changed my life. If you go to the Message translation and you read 2 Corinthians 13:5, it says this: examine yourself to make sure you are solid in the faith. Don't drift along taking things for granted. So people need to start examining themselves. Examine the way you're voting. The way in which you vote. Does it show your love and your allegiance to the God that you say that you serve? That's the question. It's not about party affiliation, but are we voting in a matter where our love and our faithfulness to the God that we worship is expressed the way in which we vote?
So, if I hear you correctly, that also admonishes us to actually examine the candidates that we're voting for?
Most definitely. When I was born, I knew I was born black, but I realized I was not born a Democrat or Republican, I was born a sinner. So through reading the scriptures and applying the truth of the scriptures that relates to my life, I had to do the same thing with politics. I had to read, I had to study to show myself approved, because it's the truth that sets you free. I had to read the history of both parties, the information about both candidates, and stop voting based on my emotions and what I thought was family tradition, but vote based on my allegiance to the God that I serve.
Well, K. Carl, I hear you mention this whole 3/5 rule that was written into the Constitution, and oftentimes within the African American communities, we hear the talk of how this was the prejudicial portion of not being able to count a black man as a full man. Can you go into detail on that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I'm a graduate of Historical Black College, Alabama A&M University. And in college, I was taught that the Founding Fathers gave us slavery in the Constitution. They had no regard for black life, so they put in the 3/5 clause to say that blacks are 3/5 of a human being. But Douglass is so key here because Douglass believed that himself at one time. But when you go back and study the life and the writings of Douglass, Douglass is the one who gives clarity to the 3/5 clause. Douglass was in a debate, if you will, in 1861, where Douglass said, wait a minute, the 3/5 clause has nothing to do to say that blacks are less than human. It has nothing to do to say blacks are 3/5 of a human being. What it was a compromise between the northern states and the southern states. The southern states wanted to count blacks in captivity as one person, one vote. The northern states said, well, if you free them, we'll let you count them as one person, one vote. Have some respect for their life. If you can't do that, we got to get this Constitution ratified, so we need to compromise here. So the compromise was to limit the southern states to count the black population as 3/5 of a vote, which cut their representation in Congress. If not, then we would have had southern slave states leading the way in Congress, and slavery probably never would have been ended anytime soon. So Douglass is so important here because Douglass said, wait a minute, the Constitution is an anti-slavery document. The 3/5 clause was a protection of life, not to hinder life, and not to say that blacks were less than human. So that's very important. Douglass is key to that because Douglass valued life. Douglass valued life so much. In his writings, he talked about all the atrocities he saw on the plantation, all the mass murders he saw, and indiscriminate killings on the plantation, and it made him weep. when he saw things happen to his family, his aunt in one particular case, and other slaves. So this whole idea about the importance and the value of the black life is important, because when the Constitution was written, it was actually written to protect blacks and the lives of blacks.
Terry Beatley, president of No Excuse Ministry Political Action Committee, is also here. And Terry, when we talked about the 3/5 clause in the Constitution that Kay Carl just mentioned, and the fact that it was actually for the protection of life instead of the limitation of life, how did you get involved with that?
Oh, that's a great question. It really began with when I was homeschooling my children. We were studying American history. And I thought, how did we morph into a nation that has allowed the killing of 53 million innocent children? So I began to research, and all roads led back to an organization by the name of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And I spent about 2.5 years researching as much as I could. I'd read every book that I could get my hands on. And what I discovered was this issue called eugenics, or purification of the race. And it had to do so much with integrating this worldview, this philosophy, into the minority community. And what I determined to do is share this information with as many people as I could. So I began sharing it with black ministers in Virginia. And what I discovered was that they didn't know this information either. So it's a part of American history that's not being told, and it has to do with certain people in power who make laws and policies who perhaps embrace a different worldview than what America was founded upon. And so what happened was Margaret Sanger, who's the founder of Planned Parenthood, she had died back in 1966. So I thought, who can I go to as a primary, as an original source of information? And I want to give God the glory for this, because he opened up the door to be able to fly to Manhattan, New York on December 1st, 2009 and interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson. And Dr. Bernard Nathanson has a story that's been really undertold, and I made the man a promise that I would carry his message across America until everybody knew it and lives would be saved. And that's indeed what I'm doing, and that's how I got involved.
So your beginning started with Bernard Nathanson. Mm-hmm. Who was he?
Dr. Bernard Nathanson was an obstetrician gynecologist back in the 60s and 70s, and he was staunchly a pro-abortion activist. And around 1969, he formed an organization it's now called NARAL, N-A-R-A-L. Back then, it was an acronym for National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Law. They've changed that since then. It's now called National Abortion and Reproductive Action League. Bottom line, it's a political action committee. It's basically made up of lawyers, and they have activist lawyers in all 50 states. And the impact that Planned Parenthood, in addition to NARAL, has had on America, on children, on parental rights, into the black community. It's not just a black issue, but it's very much disproportionately affected the black community. And so Dr. Bernard Nathanson, within 2 years of forming NARAL and the help of a $7,500 budget and a public relations firm, he and his group managed to overturn the anti-abortion law that had been on the New York State books for about 150 years. And then he opened up his abortion clinic, facility, I don't like to call them clinics, and he and his team unfortunately began aborting innocent children to the tune of about 120 a day. Dr. Bernard Nathanson is probably the most credentialed person in America to talk about the abortion industry and how it's impacted everything I just named. He personally aborted 5,000 children with his own hands. He trained doctors on another 10,000 children. And then while he managed his facility for about 4 years, he felt personally responsible for the death of about 75,000 children.
Wow.
But his story has a twist.
So Terry, you talk about a twist in your story. What was the twist? You got me intrigued.
Well, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, he had a twist, and the twist is this. After feeling personally responsible for the death of 75,000 innocent human beings, black, white, Asian, Indian, everybody in between, a friend of his developed the new and improved ultrasound machine. I think the year was 1974. And he, for the first time, saw a clear image of the preborn baby in the ultrasound machine image. What he saw was a child sucking her thumb. He'd see on another one a child yawning and stretching, and suddenly, after the death of 75,000, the co-founder of the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Law became pro-life. And he spent the rest of his life, and he lived up into his early 80s. He died about a year and a half ago. He spent the rest of his life trying to stop what he had started, but it was too late. Because as the old saying goes, if you give evil 1 inch, evil's going to take 1 mile. And so I asked him, how did you do this? And he said it was the most successful execution of a marketing campaign that probably has ever been delivered onto the United States of America. And bottom line, it all had to do with warping public opinion, or really getting public opinion on the pro-abortion people's side. And it was a 6-part formula. And the formula started with, and it's really just a basic probably of law, but I'm not a lawyer, that it was whoever frames the debate usually wins it. And so here we were coming out of the 1940s, 1950s, then the radical 1960s. No one was really, for the most part, talking too much about legalized abortion. Then all of a sudden, wham, abortion should be legal. And so the Christian community, no one was really prepared for an adequate response, even though they should have been. The next part was drumming up the cynical slogans. And so he hired a public relations firm, or NARAL did, and Dr. Bernard Nathanson drummed up the slogans, it's a woman's right to choose, it's a woman's choice. And so that appealed to our nature of justice, and each thing he did that I'm getting ready to outline, there was a specific purpose for it, so that appeals to our sense of justice. And the next thing was fabricated poll results. He knew that if he told the real number, that it was just a minority of people in America wanted legalized abortion, so he pulled the number 60%. That is the number he would tell the media. And it was a complete lie, but if you repeat the lie long enough, it becomes the truth. And that was part number 3, repeating the lie. Number 4 was the false data. He would look right at the media, and he may have testified about this to Congress, but I'm not sure on that one, but he would tell the media 1 million women a year were having illegal abortions. The real number was about 100,000. He also would say that 10,000 women a year were dying from illegal abortions, therefore they need to be legalized and made safer. And what happened, the real number was about 200 women a year were dying from illegal abortions. So lots of false data. And then a complicit media. He could tell the media anything, and the media would run with it. So kind of when you put it in context, the setting, we were coming out of the radical 1960s, everything is upside down, and then this new fashionable enlightened idea to legalize abortion. And it worked, and bottom line, he changed America, and 53 million people are now missing.
Wow. And so after he changed and you had a meeting with him, what is the message he wanted you to carry to America?
Yeah, in addition, I told him I so wanted to teach America how abortion's been marketed for 35 plus years. And he said, Terry, continue to do that. But then he said, I want you to take America a simple message. And we shook hands on this, and I said, okay, what is it? I'll do it. And he said, you tell them these 6 words: love one another. Abortion is not love. And I said, that is simple enough, and I can take that to America. And so I began taking it into the black community, and I was teaching them about Planned Parenthood's agenda to advance the eugenics agenda, which is basically part of a non-Christian worldview, which is all about purification of the race. Kay Carl talked about 3/5 clause and the controlling powers, particularly down south, and they knew that we're going to have about 6 million African Americans who were free, and they were poor and they were uneducated, and what are they going to do about it? And so the idea of controlling the births and then and reducing the population became the next novel idea of Planned Parenthood. And so that's then the saga goes on today.
Well, then if we go all the way back to the founding documents, how do the founding documents support the sanctity of life?
Okay, it's a great question, and I'm just going to bounce off what Carl Kay had said. I think it's so imperative for Americans, every American, and high schoolers to understand this. The Declaration of Independence is our foundation. It's kind of like if you start a company, the first thing you do is you set up the Articles of Incorporation. Okay? And then the Constitution is the structure, and the structure is built upon the Declaration of Independence. So what's in the Declaration of Independence? God is mentioned 4 times in the Declaration. The Declaration of Independence was incorporated into the United States Constitution. If you look at the very end of the Constitution, the last article, when they date it, it gives the date and then it cites in the 12th year of our independence. Okay, so it's very much the two go together, okay? And keep in mind all the data that Kay Carl's gone over. So what's happened is our founders, who did embrace a Christian worldview, have incorporated that into the Declaration under the laws of nature and nature's God, as it is written. And so that's natural law and the Scripture. And so when we blend that together, we have a powerful document that has kept our freedom, that literally freed the slaves. How would we know that it was wrong for America to continue to embrace slavery? We have it. That is not loving thy neighbor. Okay? Why do we get involved with ending the Holocaust? Because we know that's wrong, right? So the Constitution gives us our structure and our foundation, and which is rooted in the Word of God, and Supreme Court justices for years have recognized that our common law is based on the Word of God. It's biblical. So if you go into the law books, it actually cites, how do we know that rape and arson and theft and all those things are wrong? Because the Bible tells us so. And that's ingrained in common law, and that is what the Supreme Court and our rule of law is based on, is common law.
Okay.
And so it's all tied together, and that protects the sanctity of human life. And I missed one of the key parts, of course, is the first enumerated protection is the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But the number one, it's recognizing that God is our creator, and our duty as citizens is to make sure we do our job, is to recognize that, and then to align our votes accordingly.
Well, thank you, Terry, for that insightful information.
Sure.
Well, Dr. Gray, in hearing all this and understanding the postmodern worldview, in your profession as a physician, how does that affect healthcare with all the other discussions you've heard?
It's been a rather fascinating conversation. I want to thank all the other panelists here. But the postmodern view kind of transcends just one particular area. We see it in the fixed meaning of the Constitution, or the intrinsic dignity of human life, or a fixed truth as it applies to the definition of marriage. And it also involves healthcare. And we've talked a lot about healthcare in terms of the national healthcare debate that's gone on. But what's interesting about healthcare, it's not a Democrat or independent or Republican issue. It's a very personal issue. And as a working physician, it's really about, for me, between me and my patients. That's what this is about. It's not about political party. The way the postmodern worldview impacts healthcare is what it does is it fundamentally transforms or changes the nature of the patient-physician relationship. So when I was back in residency, I read a book, Rethinking Life and Death. And in that book, Peter Singer redefines human life so humans are, quote, fully human until the 5th week of age. So if an infant is born with a disability, this goes past abortion now into infanticide. That infant could actually be put to sleep or killed. His argument is that if we don't have all these infants with disabilities, then we don't spend all that money treating them as they grow up, and we can use that money and invest it in children that are much more gifted. It makes much more efficient, effective practice of medicine. Of course, as a Hippocratic physician, I don't subscribe to that position at all. So what I see is that when there's a transfer of money from we the people to government, and then government then chooses how to give that back to us in the form of benefits or healthcare benefits. Whoever holds power, or whoever controls the money, holds the power to choose, and that's it. Exemplified in the story of Barbara Wagner. Barbara Wagner was a 64-year-old gal, and she had recurrent lung cancer, but didn't have insurance. And not having insurance, she fell under the Oregon Health Plan. It's a state-run program in Oregon for those without insurance. So she went to see her oncologist, and he recommended treatment with Tarceva, new chemotherapy. But instead of receiving the chemotherapy, instead she got a letter from the state of Oregon saying they would not pay for her chemotherapy. Instead, they would either pay for hospice or for physician-assisted suicide. So as I said before, government compassion sounds so noble. But in the end, whoever pays holds the power to choose. And as we're running out of money as a nation, states are short of money and the nation's short of money, it's really going to start to hit those that are sort of stuck in the system of government dependency, especially those of Medicare and Medicaid. So we have to start to fundamentally rethink how we can restructure these programs, not based on a worldview that can destroy the life that's not contributing to the collective, but to start to respect the individual life, regardless of party or race or socioeconomic status. So there is a way, and I've outlined that through my nonprofit Physicians for Reform. I won't go through all the policy stuff here, because this is really about how worldviews affect us. And there's a Judeo-Christian worldview, and as a physician, that means each individual patient is special. And then there's a postmodern worldview where the collective is really what we're supposed to look out for. Instead of the well-being of the individual patient, it's for the financial interest of the state. And based on this, there's about 40% of physicians looking to leave medicine in the next 5 years because they don't want to become controlled by the state.
So when you talk about this affects Medicaid and Medicare, are we talking about seniors and low-income people? And how does that affect?
Yeah, in some ways, those are the people that are going to be most devastated by the current course that we're on. So we need to find alternatives to stabilize Medicare for seniors. That can be done through block grants, and then use the money we save through Medicaid block grants to use that savings to stabilize Medicare for seniors. We can rework Medicaid for the less well-off financially. It's interesting, there's a study put up by the Government Accountability Office showing that the medical outcomes for patients on Medicaid oftentimes were worse than that of patients with no insurance at all. And we can spend $400+ billion a year on this system and achieve worse outcomes than people with no insurance. So, but there is a way to start to restructure the Medicaid program to deliver better care, better outcomes, restore that patient-physician relationship, which will be destroyed under a postmodern worldview.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gray. It's been very insightful, and it's been very insightful, Terry. And hey, Carl, one question I had left for you, though, is why should people vote their values?
No, as I listened to Terry describe the message God has given her and Dr. Gray, the thing that linked us together is that this is not a Democrat issue. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a black issue or white issue. This is a human issue. So this message that we're giving a call out to believers to vote their values. If we just vote our values, we can stop the trend that's happening to our nation right now. And there's a quote from Robert Brown Elliott that I love to share. During Reconstruction, Robert Brown Elliott was a congressman out of South Carolina. And he said this on one occasion: "I am a slave to principles. I call no political party master."
Wow, that's some powerful words.
Yes.
From so long ago.
So long ago.
Bishop E.W. Jackson, founder and president of STAND, Staying True to America's National Destiny, joins us. And Bishop Jackson, when we look at the postmodern worldview, how does that affect America's marriage situation?
It's important that marriage remain a union between one man and one woman, first of all, because that's the way God ordained it. God created male and female and said, "Therefore shall a man leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife." The word wife in the Bible can never refer to a man marrying a man or a woman marrying a woman. It refers to one man and one woman. So we ought to maintain the definition that God gave us, first of all. But secondly, marriage is the bedrock of civilization. For over 6,000 years of human history, this is the way we have been organizing ourselves. It is the most fundamental institution of society. And for people to tinker with that and to try to redefine that, to me, is the very height of arrogance, and not only undermines a fundamental Judeo-Christian value, but to me, it undermines civilization itself. And thirdly, children are best raised in a family with one man and one woman.
What is the potential impact on our children when the definition of marriage is altered from your point of view?
Well, we know from various studies and from observation the impact on children when they are raised without a mother and father married in the home. That's where children are most abused. That's where children have the least guidance. That's where they end up often in lives of crime, involved with drugs, just doing the wrong things because they don't have that two-parent guidance that they need. Now, we also know that in homosexual families where children are being raised by two women or two men, the children become very confused about male and female roles. In one instance, for example, I know of a teacher who told me that a child saw two women walk in and told the children in his classroom that one of the women was his daddy. Now, that's confusion. Children have enough pressure on them growing up in modern culture without the confusion of not understanding the difference between the sexual roles of men and women. I think the impact on children is absolutely, potentially devastating, and it'll probably be many years before we see it. We simply can't allow the definition of the family to be altered because the children are at stake.
Why do you say to those who state government is no business in regulating or defining our marriage?
Well, I believe that government does have a legitimate role in putting its imprimatur, its seal of approval, on such an essential institution as that of marriage. Imagine if there were no rules, no regulations, no government sanctioning of marriage. Well, then who defines it and what are those definitions? I know that we'd like to think that people would stay within the bounds that most of us would agree are appropriate, but I think life has proven and history has proven that people like to push the envelope. And I think that the moment you remove government's involvement in institutionalizing, in protecting, in perpetuating marriage, I think what you'll have is a free-for-all. And I think once marriage is done away with, I think you'll have a United States of America that you would not recognize. We must have government approving and continuing to support the institution of marriage.
As a minister of the gospel, what do you think about Christians who say it's okay to redefine marriage so long as I remain believing in the biblical truth of marriage?
I don't believe that Christians can afford to ignore what's happening in the culture and simply say, well, as long as we remain true to the biblical definition of marriage, it doesn't matter what happens to the culture around us. What about the children being taught the importance of homosexuality in the public schools in California? What about the many places in which children are being taught against their parents' wishes to embrace the homosexual lifestyle? And it is happening. No, we can't afford to roll up in a cocoon or try to live in a bubble and ignore the degeneration of the culture around us. We're supposed to be salt and light in a lost and dying world. And if we are doing that, then we will not only live out the biblical definition of Christian marriage in our own homes, but we will seek to uphold that definition in the entire culture. We will vote for people who believe in that definition. We will support policies that uphold that definition, and we will oppose everything and everyone and every political force that tries to change it. So yes, I think Christians have got to do more than simply live out the biblical definition of marriage ourselves. We have got to uphold that definition in the broader culture.
This is a video project of the Vote Your Values Coalition, a group of speakers and activists concerned about the adverse impact of the postmodern worldview on public policy issues. Thank you for joining us.